Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Bulgasal, Season 1, Episode 9. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, we are picking up immediately where the last episode left off with Sungun saying like, yo, it wasn't me that killed your family, it was actually Yote, and he's like, no, look at her. She believes her own BS so much. Like, look in her eyes. Oh, obviously she's telling the truth. And she's like, also, when he tries to choke her and try to kill her, she's like, I know your secret. He's like, oh, you figured it out. Does it matter? Because if I can kill you right now, that's all that matters. Because it's like, right, I could get Hual later on to find you again and like rip out, like finally destroy your soul. But I can at very least kill you at any point in time. It just sucks for me, but still. Because Hual's in a position where he doesn't know what to believe. He's been brought up with this now, and it's like, okay. So for now, he's like, until I figure it out, stay away. So he ended injecting Yute with the poison, and as Sungung is taking him away, Detective Quan shows up and actually helps, which now he's conflicted because he's like, okay, so he's a Bulgasal, you knew the entire time, but it's like, no, he used to be human. It's like, what? She's like, I'll explain it all later. Based on the conversation later on where Hual was supposed to explain everything, didn't tell him everything, just because there was so much happening. Because also explaining all that, especially considering where, you know, how Quan feels about it right now. Because granted, Quan doesn't know everything about Hual, but Hual doesn't know everything about Quan either. That when he was, because he still thinks this is about that detective and everything, like the case from 15 years ago. No, it goes back to his childhood. Once again, his sister being murdered by Bulgasal. To be fair, the only Bulgasal who has that ability to make people's nose bleed is... The only person who could do that so far is Yute, but it could be like, no, like, if at full strength, maybe Hual would be able to do it too, but all he's ever done is drink animal blood and not human blood because he made his promise to his father, so... But we got some really interesting insight into Yute's past. Finding out, like, you know, so 1,000 years ago, he wasn't a Bulgasal yet. So it does turn out, whatever her circumstances are, Sung-On is at least amongst the trio, she is the oldest, she's the oldest of the Bulgasals. Because 1,000 years ago, she was a Bulgasal. Yute wasn't one yet. So she made him one, but I guess she created the circumstances of why he's, like, maybe it was to punish him or something, and then, like, ever since then, he's been trying to get back at her the entire time. Like I said, I think she must have connected them together so that it's like, right, you're going to be in this internal suffering, and the only way you'll be able to make it end is when you've met these certain conditions, and that's, like, destroying her soul 8 times. Was it 8 or was it 7? Either way, I believe it's 8 times, but I could be misremembering. It might actually be 7. It's one of those. Destroying it a certain amount of times, like, I wonder how did he find that out? Did she tell him, like, oh, you'll have to do that? But she knew, like, it'd be like, oh, you'd have to live forever and a very, very long time to, like, accomplish all of that. Like, did she already know that by the time he gets to the end, he wouldn't be able to pull the trigger on it because of their connection? Maybe because every time he kills her, the connection has only gotten stronger and stronger and stronger over the years. So that's why it's to the point he can't destroy the soul in the end, like, to prevent her from reincarnating. There's a lot that we still don't know about those circumstances, but it is interesting to know, like, right, so she is the original. I was wondering if he was, and it is interesting to use the word original because this is 1,000 years ago, and it makes me think of, like, the originals from, like, the Vampire Diaries and such, right? So it kind of reminds me of that a little bit. It probably means, like, because she must have been, like, a pretty, like, powerful Bulgasal. Like, I'm going by, like, vampire rules. Like, most things kind of set that up, whether it's the Vampire Diaries universe or even, like, True Blood. Like, if you've been around for a long time, the older you are, usually the more powerful you are. And I think that's most I guess a good chunk of vampire lore leans in that direction. But what was interesting is to find out that Yote, his father back then, 1,000 years ago, was a previous incarnation of Detective Quan, which is interesting, especially if you find out that he's the one that actually killed Quan's father. That'd be really interesting. I mean, it's this thing, like, the conversation about, like, basically people's fates and stuff being tied together is kind of a big thing for Hawal, where he feels like the people in his life end up getting dragged into his karma, and now, like, everything's, like, playing itself out the same way again, and, you know, even centuries later, things are still playing out the same way as, like, years and centuries ago. You know, it's fascinating. But to know, like, right, he was the second, like, son that wasn't the loved one. He wasn't, he was the one that was sick all the time. He was never, like, the loved son. And so his father loved his first son because, you know, oh, the first son, he takes after me and blah, 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 blah. And it turns out Yote ended up brutally murdering his brother out in the mountains because of jealousy or resentment, and made it seem like it was Bulgasal who did it, when in actuality, Bulgasal stopped him. Well, it was Sangan, as a Bulgasal, stopped him from killing innocent people who witnessed him brutally bashing his brother's head in. And it's like, wow, that's crazy. But now it makes sense why he was setting that all up, but why he also was like, last episode was like, yeah, let Detective Quan go. He has a connection to him just like Hawal. They're both his children under different circumstances. Maybe he was adopted as well. All he said was like I think he say like his second son by a different wife or something like that. I can't remember the exact wording. But I think Yote was like his biological son, whereas Hawal was his adopted son. Maybe that's so interesting. You want to work with him, but I'm sure there is some underlying resentment there, because it's like, right, because Hawal was his second child in that incarnation, because he already had his daughter Sol at the time. So, because I'm sure Hawal might be a little older. Maybe they're the exact same age, but Hawal was brought into the family, you know, second wise, you know, so that's just fascinating to know their ties run even deep, because even Hawal doesn't know that now, but it's like, now that kind of shows why he was a little like hesitant, why he wasn't all like, he was threatening, but he never did it, he never pulled the trigger on it, which is interesting considering it seems like you're not too above killing your brother, which makes me wonder, is that like I said, does that he has to know more about Hawal to know about his family and stuff like that, so he knows who his dad was. So it's like, yeah, so he must be setting this situation up, because my brain is going a million miles an hour, because I'm trying to think, like, could it be a thing of, like, I was like, for a second I was like, do you think he's going to try and kill Hawal? But it's like, no, he wants Hawal to stay like a Bulgasal, but maybe that's the way he can punish his father, by being like, oh, you're choosing your second son. In his mind, he's like, your serial killers who like, oh, like it's like a serial killer who kills women who looks like his mom because he has mom issues. Like the psychopathy behind that, like maybe it's a similar thing of like, oh, you were the second son that was born in, I'll kill you, and this way and it's like, maybe that's his way of punishing Hawal, because like, if anything, maybe he's the one that actually cursed Hawal, because it's like, you're the second, because like, obviously, like, he was born to a different family, he hadn't even come to your family yet, so like, there's like I said, maybe it has something to do with Hawal's previous reincarnation, because he doesn't know about his previous past lives, he's been alive for 600 years, so he's never really dived into that. I mean, to be fair, he doesn't really have a soul for Siho to look through to see his past lives, but maybe if she did it to Sangan, maybe she'd be able to see not only her past, but also Hawal's, considering it is his soul. I don't know, man. There's just so much to that. Like I said, we got a little glimpse into it, but you're like, that's so interesting to know that stuff about him. Like that poor couple that he let live last episode. It's like, yeah, I'm injured and I need to eat, so he ends up killing them. And obviously, Do-Young comes to be like, hey, like, Hawal's back and everything, and every time he comes back or whatever, he's passing out. He's like, so did you, I heard you saved him and Detective Quan, and it's like, yeah, so I need you to do something for me, Do-Young. I need you to basically get Sangan to come to my place alone without Hawal knowing. He's like, I don't really want to do this. Like, really? After everything I've done for you and your brother, you're not going to do this for me? Remember when I met you all those years ago? When we saw him younger and saw his eyes, I was like, is he blind? Did not even correlate in my head to think like there were. I was like, oh, look, I was like, with I'm sure they had contacts in the actor's eye, but I'm like, oh, is that supposed to be him being blind? I was like, wow. I was like, wait, so he was able to fix you and your brother? I was like, oh, that's interesting. Did not even correlate in my mind with what we got at the very end of the episode. I'll go ahead and talk about it. I was not expecting that twist. That's really interesting, because even Hwal didn't see that coming, because he was under the impression, because when he found out Siho was pregnant, he was like, oh, like, would it be interesting, like, if Achan was brought back to life again, and this time, like, he would want Seoul, like, Siho's previous, like, incarnation, he'd want her to be here with their son, being like, yes, this is them having to be able to have a happy life, the happy life they couldn't live before. So that was fascinating. But I thought that was such a beautiful twist. And I'm like, wow. Literally everyone in that house has some past connection to you. You know? It's like, you know, and you're like, fate is fickle and funny and interesting. The way it literally, drew people back into your life. I mean, hell, your father lives, I mean, you're tangentially connected to your biological father from a different life. Because your dad, well, Detective Kwan obviously being connected because the detective he worked with who killed herself, that was her husband, is Hwal's biological father reincarnated. So it's like, it's all there. The threads and the connection. Dude, this is some Once Upon a Time stuff, and I'm loving it. If you've never seen the show Once Upon a Time, there are so many threads. Like, it's like, you know, that mystery board thing where you have like usually it's used for murders, but you can use it just for mysteries in general, like Styles from Teen Wolf. I got Teen Wolf on the brain, specifically the TV show. When you're solving like crimes and stuff like that, you need like the red yarn and like the and all that on a board, right? Once Upon a Time is like that. It's like, okay, this character is connected to this character who's also connected to this character, and this character is family. It turns out that this is so-and-so's grandfather. It's a whole thing, and I loved it. And it's like, I'm getting that in this show, too. I'm like, oh, yes, give me. All these connections. Like, every time we turn around, we're finding deeper and deeper connections. I mean, like, the last, what was it, episode 7? Yeah, 7, we found out about Miss Lee being the little girl that's connected to Sungan's previous life, because she lived in that same house that Sungan's previous life did 50 years ago, and obviously her connection already to Hwal, considering she was like the shaman from his village back then. So it's so good, and I love the connections and the threads between everybody. But I thought that was so beautiful for it to be like, yeah, because he wasn't expecting it, because usually everyone that he's meeting is usually like, oh, you look like how I met you. But it's like, it's also sweet too to know, like, right, this is Dooyeon, the orphan. It's like, oh, and what happened? He had a sibling, a brother that died, and in the previous life he had a sister that died from, like, it was like, dude, it's like, it's there. Oh my god, I was like, that's such a good reveal. I really loved that. I thought that was so interesting. But like the point I was making is like, Dooyeon is like, if his son was able to grow up, it's like, oh, would this be what my son would have kind of become, you know? But right, like I said, even before we, like, obviously I've kind of thrown that up there early, but there's other elements to the episode. Obviously, Hwal's trying to figure out, like, all right, so what Sungang is telling me, is it true? And it's like, all right, let's go meet Gobun. And they do, but upon seeing the scar on Hwal's hand, she freaks out. Because I was about to say, she's not going to be the most reliable person because she has Alzheimer's or dementia, like she's losing her memory. But when she sees Hwal and sees the scar on his hand, it freaks her out, because now Hwal believes, like, right, like, the fact is that if she's so scared of me, that means you in a previous life was so scared of me too. So, and he's like, I can't quite believe all of this. She's like, right. And she looks so disappointed, because she was so happy at first, because she's like, right, this means I potentially didn't kill your family. He's like, yeah, but nothing's certain. She's like, I'm certain of it. But she was disappointed because she's like, oh, you don't believe me? He's like, no, I said I didn't believe your previous life. It's not that I say I don't believe you. She's like, wait, you believe me? It's like, yeah, because you're like a fool with no memory. Like, you tell me everything without hiding anything. So I know I can trust you, because you're so, like, so gullible and so willing to, like, tell me everything. And she's almost like, she's like got such a sour look on her face, because she's like, that's not the compliment she was looking and hoping for. But obviously, if they can't get Gobun to be their person to kind of prove Sungun's innocence and that she wasn't the one that killed Hwal's family, it has to be another witness. And I was like, well, no one else was there. And then when they go to Siho and using her power, I'm like, what? Why you want her to see her previous life? I was like, oh, of course, you stupid idiot. She was there. She died. And so, but that also presents an interesting thing too, because it turns out Siho can't use her own power against herself. But if she looks at Dooyeon, well, that won't help either. I was about to say he was blind at the time. I was like, never mind. I was getting hyped up about to say like, oh yeah, they said it. He was blind at the time. So, but to be fair, I don't know. It's going to be interesting because it's about searching your soul's memory. So, but yeah, like I think you'd still have to see things through their eyes, I would assume, but I don't know. Because that kind of removes two of the witnesses. He basically have to find someone else from back then reincarnated to like see their memories as well. But I did like the conversation between Siho and Hwal, because he doesn't know how to necessarily be around her, and it's like, oh, she's like, why do you know about my powers? It's like, yeah, because I met you in a previous life. She's like, really, one of my previous lives? He's like, yeah, we just met briefly, you know, it was no big deal. No way you know a monster like me. She's like, you're not a monster, and why you call yourself that? He's like, what? She's like, yeah, like, I thought you were scary in the beginning. I mean, you still are a little scary, but you're not a monster. She sees him for the good person that he is. So I thought that was sweet. You know, it kind of, like, made his heart go pitter-patter, because it's like, oh, like, you know, despite their complicated relationship and everything, like, he did love her at one point in time. It just because of being cursed and what it did to their children, it led to a lot of resentment between them. Like her resenting him more so than anything. So I think his feelings for her never really changed. I think it just got complicated because she hated him because of what they're losing their daughter and her son getting blinded like that. Especially like how their son always reached out to Wall, but he always kept him at a distance because he was thinking like, oh, I'm the one who did this to you, my boy. Like he kept his distance. Obviously, ultimately, very regrettably, he couldn't change that. So, but obviously the news, you know, first Miss Lee finds out about Siho being pregnant, and it's like, oh my god, and then Hwal hearing that, and like I said, wanting to think like, oh my god, like if it's Achan again, but even Miss Lee was like, don't get your hopes up, and he was like, I know. But it is this beautiful thing when everyone is together, you know, because obviously like Dooyeon was like very like depressed and stuff like that, and she's like, you're the only man in here, so like talk to him. He's like, oh yes, I'm the perfect person, who spent the past 600 years alone. I'm the perfect person to talk to him. And they do talk, and Dooyeon opens up about like, right, like my benefactor, the person who's taking care of my brother, might be getting discharged soon. He wants me to do something. He's like, what is it? Well, you don't have to do it. It's like, yeah, but I owe it to him. It's like, yeah, but he shouldn't put you in a position, like, if he did something out of the goodness of his heart, he shouldn't be asking you for anything in return, so. And I love Hwal, like, putting his hand on his head and being like, it's okay. I was like, oh, this is a little brother moment before we got to what we got at the end. But at that time, I was like, oh, this is a sweet brother moment. He's almost like a little brother to you, little pal. Because it's like, yeah, because he blamed himself because he's thinking like, right, like what happened to my brother? Is it like my fault in some shape or form? Because what was it like, if one sibling's sick, the other one's going to be unhappy? I don't know whether that was in reference to like, he was probably sick first. But also the problem is also like, he got better, but his brother, I guess, technically didn't. Well, we find out later on he didn't, but so that's why he kind of always had like, you know, this air about him. And so it made him really reluctant to do this whole thing. And obviously when they're all sitting around together as a family, it's really beautiful and cute. And you're just like, oh. And then, you know, it's like, you know, Sungan talks about them being like, you know, it's like, you know, you're part of the family. And it's like, we're not family. It's like, yeah, like if we're all living under the same house, we're family. And then Miss Lee being like, yeah, we're a family, because everyone was super quiet. So I thought that was super cute. But I love that she's very, like, mom-esque. Especially earlier when, like, she was chastising him about, like, wait, you don't want to eat even though you're all about food? And they're talking about getting his diploma or his GED. Like, it's very much her. Miss Lee and Siho had, like, mom and older sister energy between the both of them. I thought that was super adorable earlier when they were chastising him about like, oh, do you have a girlfriend or something? Oh, what could that be about? You know, because it's like, oh, where'd you go? Oh, you're lying about going to school because you're not in your uniform. It was so good, and kind of got that same energy this time around. And you could tell it was hitting Dooyeon, like, he felt guilty about it because, like, oh man, Siho's pregnant, because it makes you feel a little worse about her getting kidnapped. And then now, like, you're lying to everyone. He already felt bad about it because he's already conflicted on the Sungan situation because he doesn't think she's a bad person. And he's also lying to Hwal. He wasn't feeling and vibing all that. I mean, especially to the point, like, Hwal, he had his suspicions because I guess, like, his suspicions were born from a lot of stuff, because he talks about it later on. It's like, right, you came so willingly to stay here. You weren't afraid of me, despite literally everyone else being afraid of me the moment they found out what I was, but you completely weren't. So you add in that, plus this benefactor, and like your reluctance to do stuff. It's just like, well, could it be? Like, I guess he was more so looking into it like, all right, I'm trying. Maybe he had his suspicions, but he obviously wasn't sure, so he had his guy look into it. His guy's so happy about it. So, yeah, my mysterious client, my benefacting client is back, and he's giving me all this stuff, and he's giving me a great job to look into. Which, once again, Quan and Hual had their moment too, because he's staying at that PI's place, and Hual came to check on him. He's like, oh, so you've been drinking? It's like, yeah, it's not your problem. Like, leave me alone. Like, don't worry about me. I shouldn't be your issue. And he's like, I'm sorry I didn't tell you about me being a Bulgasal. And he's like, is that all? He's like, yeah. Didn't want to tell him anything. Because even, once again, even Sung-gun doesn't know everything. She's just thinking about the whole, like, oh, tell him that you used to be human and I took your soul. But it's like she doesn't know, like, the extra elements that she isn't aware of to this story about, cool, so Siho that you're with, yeah, that's your daughter in a different life. Back when I was human, I was your son in a different life. So on and so forth, right? So there's just so much there, so. And obviously when Dooyeon brings up his reservations to Yote, like, Yote's like, cool, I guess I have to come there and do it myself, but people are going to get hurt. And then that moment Yote's like, wait, what? He's like, oh yeah, like, think about all that I did to you. Remember when I met you 10 years ago? You clinged onto my hand so tightly, and I helped you, and I helped your brother, like, so you won't do the same thing for me? And it's like, oh, cool, try to go guilt him even more after you pretty much said, like, yeah, I'm pretty much going to have to kill everybody in that house to get to her if I have to do it myself. So that is kind of the rub of it, of like, okay. But in that moment, Yote doesn't want anyone to get hurt, so he ends up asking a favor of her, and he's like, okay, Sung-gun, can you go with me? And she's like, yeah. Like, the fact is, you were asking so seriously, so of course I'm going to go along with you. And so he ends up eventually telling her the truth about, I'm taking you to Yote. He promised, like, he said everyone would get hurt if he... And I love this line because it's such a good and heartbreaking line. Good in the sense of, like, man, it's so heartbreaking that she, much like Hual, and I think that's the interesting parallel between them, they both see themselves as cursed. Because for her, it's like, right, for a sake, I let myself stay here too long. Because her whole thing was about moving around, like, never stay in one place too long. But she's like, right, I got so wrapped up in having a family again, being surrounded by people I care about, that I let it slip. I got too good. I was like, oh, I got too complacent. I should have kept moving around. So she doesn't blame Dooyeon. She blames, like, herself of, like, I didn't do what I should have been doing. Like, I kind of, like, got caught up in the moment, the sway of all this, and I let myself believe, like, everything was going to be okay. Like, that I could, everything would work out, is kind of her perspective on things. And I thought that was such a heartbreaking thing. And so she was like, cool, I'm going to leave. You tell Hual and Siho that I will call them the moment I've settled. But Dooyeon was like, no, don't go. Like, this doesn't feel right. And so he stops her from getting on the bus because she was just going to disappear. But he's like, almost like, we'll find another way. Sadly, at the same time, Detective Quan showed up in the place of the PI to give Hual the information about who Dooyeon's benefactor is. So Dooyeon and Hual walk off together, and it's like, why did you do that? Like, he was like, no, I had nothing to do with Siho's kidnapping or Detective Kwan's. I'm sorry. I just told him that you and Sung-gun, like, what your relationship was. And Hual was just like, right, never come back. Leave and never come back. He's like, no, please. He's like, if you do this, I won't have anywhere to go. Which that moment is even more heartbreaking later on, now knowing the truth, because he grabs onto his arm, and you're like a little boy holding on to his father, because back then he did the exact same thing. And what did his father do? It's sad history repeating itself. That was the thing he was explaining to Miss Lee of, like, the people he cares about getting drawn into it again. And now it's like, now knowing, like, you pushed your son away again, and that's, that was his biggest regret back in the day, was how he handled things with Achan. Now it's like, it's happening all over again, And now they all have to pack up and leave, because Dooyeon finally finds out when he calls up Yote, being like, I can't do this anymore. He's like, okay, you did a good job. He's like, all right, tell me where my brother is. You never told me the hospital. Okay, your brother died. It's like, what? He had a super rare disease, and I was just looking for the right time to tell you. It's like, horse crap. like, he was always 1 second away from snapping on Dooyeon, but I think it's because you were an important piece on the chessboard, too. Because even last episode or episode 7, when he was talking to Dooyeon, and Dooyeon was kind of talking down, and like, oh, I can't believe you did that, his hand was shaking, because either it was the pain he was in, or just because he was about to snap, and it's like, okay, don't talk like you know me, kid, but maybe it's a situation where he felt sympathetic to Dooyeon, because it's like, right, like, he himself being the second child, and luckily everything worked out for you, so maybe that's why Yute did actually have feelings for him to some extent, but it's like, right, my bigger goal takes precedence over everything, so it's like, I'll call you later, and it's like, right, if Dooyeon shows up here, do not let him into this facility or my place. Like, he isn't, like, welcomed here. Like, he said for now, so I'm wondering, is he planning on trying to repair the relationship? Because he's like, oh, we'll talk later. Like, Dooyeon's going to be happy about the fact that you've been lying to him for years, because they never specify how long it's been since his brother died. Like, his brother could have died 10 years ago. Like, who knows how, because it's like, I guess in that time frame, like, it had to be more recent or something, because it's like, how could Dooyeon go 10 years never seeing his brother? It has to be a thing of more recent years of like, okay, his brother finally died and he just never knew. It had to be more, like, fairly recently, I'd assume. And obviously Siho, like, upon finding out, like, wait, Yute knows where we are, where are we going? How did he know? And it's like, Dooyeon, and she calls him, and he tells her everything, and he's just like, I'm sorry. He's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go, because he has nowhere to go. He can't go to Yute after everything, because he realizes what kind of a terrible person Yute is. And even if he wasn't, he thought like, oh, like, even if he still wanted to go to Yute, he can't. Knowing what he did, but also like that he lied to you about your brother's going, so you literally have no family left. The only family you had was this family you made now, and they've turned their backs on you. You can't go back, because Wall was like, yo, you come back here, I will kill you if I ever see you again. And so he's kind of lost, and he's just leaving. And then obviously Wall kind of feels bad about everything. He's just like, damn it, alright, I need to find him. And then he finds out from Siho, yeah, he was blind, and it's just like, it hits him like a ton of bricks. It's like, and it almost plays into like Siho and him having that playful relationship. It's almost like it's a very brother and sister relationship, but it's like there was some connection there. And like I said, it puts things in so much perspective of like, oh, it's such a good twist, dude. I love it. But it's very heartbreaking at the same time. So hopefully in the next episode, Hwal will be able to find him. Granted, they all have to move pretty damn quickly because Yute is on his way. Like, he's going to have to go do this himself. So they got to bounce before he gets there. And they're going to have to find Dooyeon, because maybe Yute might decide to track him down and use him as a leverage. Like, cool, if I use him... Well, he thinks Hwal and them hate him, and he doesn't know that Dooyeon is Hwal's son reincarnated. So he doesn't know he have that leverage against him. So... the only person who currently knows that is Hwal. Whether he'll end up explaining that to Siho, probably not, but maybe like specifically talking to Sung-un about it, or maybe even I'd assume Miss Lee, because she's very like motherly towards him, and to be like, yeah, that's actually my son reincarnated. It's like, what? That's it? Yeah, it's crazy, you know? So it's definitely going to be very interesting to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. Before I even close this out, I'm skipping over another big thing. Obviously, I talked about it earlier, but we got a little deeper into the whole situation with Detective Kwan's dad. Turns out his dad was a reincarnated monster, the serial killer poisoner. It's like, oh, cool. So he was a monster. And so... he was going to poison them, because I guess he knew, like, Bulgasal's coming after me, and if I'm going to die, I'm going to take you with me, my children with me, you know? So he was actually initially going to poison his daughter, but then Kwan ended up, Detective Kwan back then took it and smelled it. He's like, oh, it smells weird, and then Bulgasal showed up, so they tried to run, and in the process, he ended up getting killed. So it seems like it would be Hwal, considering... he goes after the reincarnated monsters, but it's like, what other reason would Yute have to do that? But to be fair, this was 50 years ago too, but it's like, once again, there's a conversation of like, if so-and-so's memories ever come back, then it'll be an issue. Obviously, once again, everything seems like it's pointing towards Sung-un, but maybe it's pointing to someone else. Detective Kwan's sister died because, like, obviously, like, being in proximity, it was just a whole nose bleeding thing. Like, it took its toll on them, and she died from it. So once again, he never saw the Bulgasal's face. And even he's like, one of the two Bulgasals that is here in my life right now is the one who killed my sister. He just doesn't know which one. And the sad thing is he got so close to Hawal that despite like their bumpy relationship, he trusted him, but he's also like, right, I'm never going to trust you ever again. So I don't know what to make of that. Because once again, Yute's got a lot of his own secrets, so does he truly not have a lot of his memories? Even like, is he so dead certain on like, oh no, like she's the one that killed your family, or is he once again trying to manipulate Hawal? Because it's like, right, you are the second son to the father that I had. He in another life, like someone else gets to enjoy. Because it's not only you got to be, you're his second son, you're his second son who he loved and accepted, but he couldn't do the same thing for me. Because once again, I don't remember if they specified whether or not Yute was biological or adopted, like Hawal was. If he was if he was biological, of course the Hawal thing was going to sting even more. So maybe he just never knew the aftermath was going to be what it is. Once again, the curse, was it Yute or was it Sangan back then that put it on him? There's just so much that because everyone thought there was just one Bulgasal. Even back then there was two running around, Sangan and Yute. So it's like there's no telling where all this will take us. Like I said, I'm excited to see how it all plays out going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.